Do you ever try to play a chess trap in a game and it just never works out? Well, this video is for you. Today, I found and researched 5 different chess traps that I think are going to happen in a lot of games. And looking at the main database with a whole lot of games, like millions, billions of games, your opponent will statistically fall for these traps more than any others. So let's begin. First, with one e4, there's a few traps from here, but let's start with e5. Okay. So in this position, knight to f3 is a very common reply, attacking the pawn, and then black defends it. This is normal stuff. We develop the bishop, black develops theirs. We play c3. We're trying to target the center. Black brings their knight out. They attack this pawn on e4, but instead of defending it, white can play this move d4. And so far at this point, there's still like 4 million games in the database. A lot of games have been played to this point, and black almost always takes on d4 and plays bishop e4 check. And here we're gonna block with the knight. So when we block with the knight, we're actually walking into this pin and inviting black to take this pawn on e4. So black goes for it, and then we get our king out of the center. So this is going to be a gambit. We're going to sacrifice not only our e4 pawn, but also our c3 pawn, because now black is up 2 pawns. But black's king's in the center. We have a massive development advantage, and we're definitely going to be able to punish this king in the center. So in this position, we want to stop him from being able to ever castle. So we play bishop to a3, cutting that king off. And then if black falls for this trap, this is played 50% of the time. If black takes on a1, we have rook to e1 check. And this king has nowhere to run. So after knight e7, really the only way to block, we can just play rook takes e7, and it's pretty much game over. The only way to stop checkmate is to play queen takes e7 and just lose your queen. So that's obviously going to be winning for white. So a very easy trap for black to fall into. Black just takes a few pawns and then all of a sudden they lose. So that's a really good one. And then another one I wanted to show is in the Vienna game. So after e4, e5, instead of knight to f3, we try knight to c3. Now, black usually plays, more often than not, knight to c6. Knight to f6 is actually an option, but there's some more traps and ideas there. But the really cool idea I wanted to show you is after bishop c4, bishop c5, black just keeps it simple, tries to mirror us for the time being. We can play this crazy move, queen to g4. Bringing your queen out like this so early in the opening is really bad. You just don't want to do it. Because black's going to be able to attack that queen and gain time. So for example, black wants to move his d-pawn up, and black's going to be able to do so by winning time. However, if black did move their d-pawn up, say they went to d5, so they're like, aha, I got you. I double attack your bishop and your queen. We're just going to take on g7, and we're going to win that rook on h8, more likely than not. So a rook is more powerful than a bishop, so we're happy to go into that. So often, black sees this threat on g7 and plays queen to f6 with the idea of defending and attacking. And here, this is just such a really cool move. We can play knight to d5. So we're just totally inviting black to capture this pawn on f2. And we just slide our king over. It's all good. Saying chill and everything's fine. Because we actually have a tremendous amount of threats. We're threatening knight takes c7, threatening queen takes g7, and in some lines we're threatening knight to h3 and then the queen can kind of get trapped in the center. There's all sorts of threats that black has to deal with, and we're only down a pawn. Granted, our king is in the center, but we're only down a pawn. So if we can get after this king, maybe get him to not castle, maybe win a rook, like we're going to be in really good shape. So here black often plays d6, and now we have queen 6 g7. I should have mentioned earlier, queen to f1 would be checkmate if this bishop wasn't on c4. So we have to be careful. Make sure this bishop is still seeing the square. But we're good to play queen 6 g7 here. And this is just really tough for black. We're threatening again, knight takes c7, queen 6 h8. So after queen 6 g7, black is pretty much helpless. They can try to defend c7 and play a move like bishop b6, but this rook is going to be gone. We actually don't really want to take right now, because if we do, bishop to g4 check would come, and that's a little annoying. We can still survive and we're fine, but it's not necessary to add that counterplay. We can just play knight to f3, and that rook is still not going anywhere. Not to mention, now there's ideas of knight takes b6 and queen takes f2, or bishop takes f2, or f7. Anyway, this trap is really nasty. So you invite your opponent to take on f2, and then their position just falls apart. We're going to win material one way or another. It's not going to lead to checkmate or anything, but this is a decisive advantage, and just right out of the opening, like 6 or 7 moves in, white is just completely winning. It's insane. The next trap I wanted to show you is in the Sicilian defense, and actually from the black side. So I'm going to flip the board here, and after knight to f3, knight to c6, d4, this is the open Sicilian. We take on d4, knight takes d4, knight to f6. So we attack that pawn on e4, and black defends it with knight to c3. Now, d6 is the classical variation of the Sicilian. And after this move, the most common move from a club player level is bishop to e3. And after this move, we have knight to g4, just being a pest and annoying that bishop. And it causes a lot of problems because white really doesn't want to give up the bishop pair and have this really shattered and ugly pawn structure. So instead of that, they often take on c6 and they go bishop f4. I should note, if they go to d4, e5 is really strong, forcing the bishop back to e3. And then if bishop f4, we can still play e5, forcing it back to g3. Now we can't take that bishop. However, we still have a trick up our sleeve. We can play queen to b6, attacking b2, and that's a pretty important pawn. If we win b2, feels like black's position starts to fall apart. So white tries to defend it with a rook to b1, and now we play h5. So our plan is simple. We want to play h4, trap that bishop on g3. And after this move, the most common played move is h3, which is a huge mistake. Black is now completely winning because of this really nasty idea. We don't retreat. We don't hide in the face of danger. Instead, we play h4. So you might be asking, well, isn't this just a trade? And isn't that a rook? Like, can he just win a rook? But at the end of all of that, this crazy pattern with this pawn on g3 is enough to support f2, giving a checkmate. So a really nasty combination where the pawn goes all the way to g3 and supports that queen. Just really disgusting. And any other bishop move, there's still queen takes f2 because the knight is hitting that square. So f2 is a really weak square, and it can be taken advantage of in this line. So in the Caro-Kann, there's also another common trap from the white side. After this, which is the 2 knights, black often takes and then plays bishop f5. This is a normal thing to do, but this is actually slightly bad already. Black should probably play knight to f6 here, But bishop f5 is the most common move, and white plays knight g3, kicks that bishop back, and plays h4. So this is similar to a different line in the Caro-Kann, except it's a little bit different. Because usually white has a pawn on d4 and black has, say, a knight on d7, something like that. And as we'll see, the knight coming to e5 is a very dangerous idea for white. So after h4, black plays h6, we play knight to e5. So we're attacking this bishop. If black lets us take it, that's going to be really, really bad. We just take, and this bishop can come to d3 on this diagonal. We could play h5. It's really, really ugly. And so usually black retreats this bishop. That's the only square for the bishop to go. And then now we have this nice forced combination where we play queen h5. We're going to do a whole world tour with our queen right here. So it goes over to the king side, and then g6 is played. Okay, let's go back here. Now we're threatening f7 again. Okay, so black blocks it. All right, let's still threaten f7 for a third move in a row. And after black plays queen to d5, both stopping this threat and attacking the knight on e5, we can play the devastating queen takes b7. We saw this kind of idea where this rook is trapped in the Vienna line, but this has another twist to it. Black can take this with check and then just develop and say, okay, I'm gonna get castle next turn, and you can take my rook, but my pieces are pretty happy. But we don't have to take the rook. Instead, we can play queen c8 checkmate in one move. That's crazy. Because in this position, funnily enough, white more often than not takes on a8 because they're just so blinded by free rook. That's the whole idea of taking on b7, right? Well, there's also this idea, which is important to know. Queen c8 can be a really nasty checkmate. The last one I wanted to show you is against the Dutch defense. And this is a weird move order, but it's really, really nasty. So after knight f3, a lot of times people play the Dutch against knight f3 because it's slightly favorable to play it against knight f3 than d4. So anyway, if people play f5 here, we can play d3. Modest move. We're not taking too much space in the center. And after knight f6, we just go for it. e4. We already sacrificed this e4 pawn and ask black, what are you going to do? We're threatening to take, potentially to play e5. And so black obliges and takes this pawn. Now we bring this bishop to d3 with a tempo. We're attacking that knight, but we also have nasty intentions of going to this g6 square. So the knight retreats. We play knight to g5. This is a weird looking move, but our idea is after a move like knight c6, we can play knight takes h7 and then bishop to g6. Oh, that is so gross. That king is just, that's terrible. I mean, we could play queen h5 too, but I mean, this is nasty. So anyway, these are some of my favorite traps, but I think they are statistically some of the best traps because your opponents are actually pretty likely to fall for these traps. And the most common moves often lead to our opponent's demise. So thank you for watching, and let us know in the comments if you try this in your own games.